Uh, we will start at 9:05. Just waiting for 4 minutes more.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Hi, ma'am. Yes, we can hear you.
Hi. Okay, so good evening to all. My name is Varanya, and I will be a host of the session today on behalf of Open Collective. Let me introduce our speaker. Ananya Nayak is an architect and architectural writer whose work explores sustainable design, building performance, and the relationship between architecture, climate, and culture. She holds a Bachelor of Architecture from Bengaluru and an MSc in Advanced Sustainable Design from the University of Anna. She brings a research driven perspective to her writing for ArchDaily, where she investigates topics ranging from material innovation and ecological design to urban infrastructure and traditional environmental knowledge. Ananya, we're really glad to have you today. And before we start, I would like everyone to note down their questions, whatever questions they have. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Varanya. I hope everyone can hear me well.
Yeah.
Perfect. Good evening. Wonderful to be here, and thank you to Open Collective for inviting me. And thank you all for spending your Saturday night talking about something that architecture schools don't usually spend a lot of time talking. When architecture students hear the word writing, there's usually a collective sigh, and people immediately think of, say, dissertations, reports, or assignments. But I promise I'll keep it fun, and it will not be about anything that is going to make you think about work from your studios. But it isn't really about writing today, it's just about the way we think. Writing simply will become the visible evidence of how we think. And over the last few years, like Varanya said, my career has taken me through architectural practice in India to post graduation research in Scotland and environmental consultancy in the UK. To now that I also do writing for ArchDaily. So these experiences look very different on paper. And when I take you through my journey, you'll probably understand that they all come from very different disciplines of architecture. But looking back, I have realized that they were all teaching me the same thing. And that is not about how to design better buildings, but how to think better before designing them. And that's sort of where I'd like to start today. Um, so we are in an age where AI can generate floor plans, beautiful renders, concept statements, mood boards, and even some presentation layouts in seconds. So the question we want to ask is, what exactly makes you guys valuable as an architect? And usually that's not a rhetorical question. It's something that I think about almost every day, especially working in editorial, where we get so many projects submitted to us, and we see ideas and submissions day in and out. 5 years ago, I think architects were competing with other architects, but today we're competing with incredibly powerful tools. And what I've realized is that AI has become very good at producing answers, but what it still can't do is ask questions that are worth asking. And architecture has never been about producing answers. So it's about asking the right question. And as today's session, I hope that you all remember that about why your plan looks the certain way. I think architecture education sometimes accidentally convinces us that we start with a blank sheet. This is a picture of a recent project we've just completed, and it was never about um, drawing. It was always about observing, researching, connecting ideas, making decisions. And the drawing simply becomes the final part of presenting these ideas. So imagine two architects were dealing with a site like this, which was completely thought on both sides. And both can produce beautiful drawings, both know the software, and both understand construction. But one architect sort of spent ages trying to learn that the light coming into this building is the only open facade on the west, which brings in a lot of heat during the summers. So, how would the family living here actually enjoy the diffused light throughout the day? So, that means designing an elevation which probably looks something like this. And the other architect would have sort of started sketching immediately, but we spent a lot of time going and speaking to the family, understanding what exactly they wanted in terms of design. And both architects have the same have different approaches, but sort of they might um, feel like people when people look at the outcome, they might feel like probably the one who asked questions and spent some time doing some research and connecting ideas uh, designed a better building. So let's discuss the architect workflow. So the workflow usually looks like, I think one thing in university that they don't teach is that you don't start at the design stage, which sort of is where we start because we do a lot of like late nights, and by the time we started, it's already designed. So usually in university, the process seems like you receive a brief, you design, and then you submit. There's a little bit of critiquing in the middle, but usually when you start out with an idea, it's what the final submission sort of resembles. But in professional practice, that's not how it works. You keep observing, researching, thinking, and most importantly, communicating, because your first idea is never going to be the best one. When you speak to the client is going to tell you that you've got to go back and revise again, observe again, refine and redesign. So the best architects that I've worked with don't usually design linearly, and the writing and drawing part comes way later, and the biggest section becomes the observing. So again and again and again, that's why I love this workflow. It isn't sort of a checklist; it's a loop. So every time you go around the same loop again and again, um, it becomes your project becomes a little bit stronger, and your ideas that you communicate become much more better. So let's dive into my journey, which Varanya very kindly explained. I studied in RE, did my 5 years of undergrad. I graduated from there. I spent some time in Ahmedabad doing my internship with a small studio which worked in commercial practice, which was Studio ADG. And then I worked in Delhi with a sustainable design firm. And then I left for the University of Edinburgh, where I got a chance to actually work in research with a lot of different companies like the Edinburgh City Council, students as change agents, and I also did a lot of leadership programs. Um, I then ended up, after straight out of my graduation, ended up working for 2 years in building performance modeling with Max Fordham, which is a 60-year-old company in the UK. And I worked there for 2 years. But the plan always was to start my own firm. So I came back last December and I started my own company with my partner called 27 Degrees. What you will notice at the bottom half of this chart is that I have been writing throughout the journey. Even when like the hours in university got really long and I was still working late hours in my internship, even during all those times, because I genuinely enjoyed writing. I sort of used everything that I learned during my practice, sort of how to look at design through a different lens, and professional practice teaching me constraints and how quickly you realize that beautiful ideas also have budgets and regulations and timelines. My writing sort of evolved, and it has taken me about 10 years of writing now consistently. That in 2026, I've been working with ArchDaily, and I produce a byline every week. The topics that I choose are also very much influenced by my work, which is on the top half of the slide. So it is not really about just writing about the most current topic. It's also in getting inspired from your own experiences, your own exposure to design, to education, to experience in the field, and my writing sort of got more and more evolved as I went through my work and my professional practice. So let's look at what changed my understanding of architecture because I've worked in all three sectors. Um, Usually, uh, simply can we build responsibly is a question that's asked in practices because almost anything can be built. But the real question is whether it should be built that way because does it respect the resources of the client, whether it is maintainable, whether it is financially realistic, whether over the next 50 years the practice can still boast about that being their own design, have they evolved from it? So that is why the understanding of architecture in practices is very different. And in research, what usually happens is research trains you to look at the idea first. So suppose you have a design module, you would look at how you can test it, you can find evidence for it, and I will get into it when we come to the that part of the presentation. And then editorial introduces the third question, which is the one that surprised me the most because every week there's a new building by some architect in the world, and some projects are technically very excellent, some are visually very beautiful looking, but very few projects stay with you. And as architecture students, we've all had our favorite building or a building that we usually quote when we're talking to other people. But why is that? Maybe because the building taught you something, maybe it changed the way you think, maybe it contributed to something larger than themselves, the idea itself. And that's when I realized something that architecture isn't just about making the buildings, it's also about producing knowledge. And that's a very different way of looking at writing. So this article that's on your slide is about sacred landscapes, and I don't think any of us or our parents were ever involved in making something that's an old temple. But there is so much to learn from these kind of architecture because there is a story there, there's a materiality there, which eventually leads to asking some great questions about writing. So this exercise is one of the most important slides because usually when we're students and we're given a brief to say design a school, immediately we begin sketching and we think that that's sort of going to give us an idea because we've seen something, we're influenced by something. But a better architect will pause and ask, how do children actually learn? So if a child learns sitting better, like sitting in rows, or some like to learn outside, some learn through play, some learn through group activities, and some are very secluded and learn through individuality. So the single question of asking how do children learn will simply change completely the architecture that you are building. So the same applies to say housing, the same applies to libraries. Um, in a home, in an Indian home, I think there are so many relationships. There's the question of privacy, conflict, celebration. And if you understand those things, the floor plan almost starts designing itself. And the question isn't really about, say, how do I design the housing or how do I design a library? If knowledge is gathered by just doing the right, asking the right questions and doing the right research, then good architects don't need to begin with solutions. The curiosity to find how a system already works will lead to your solution. So this is some time that I spent in Barcelona last year, and I got to understand about what people actually see because you have Sagrada Familia 1 year before it's actual completion, which for your information is still not completed in 2026. They just opened it up, but it's not complete yet. But everybody who's seeing these pictures usually say there's a lot of traffic, there's shops, there's crowd and buildings. But what an architect should see how people behave, what sort of a climate this Barcelona is built of, and what usually influences why people are under shaded regions most of the time. Where do people naturally gather? Where do they avoid? What side of the street is more occupied in the afternoon? Why are certain benches on the street actually empty all the time? Um, does the place function better at night or better in the morning? What has the user sort of modified for their own good? Because if you think about Sagrada Familia as a project as well, there's so many different architects who have worked on it. I think Gaudi designed it 100 years ago, but then a lot of other architects ended up contributing to it. So it has sort of adapted to their styles as well. And that's what design is about. So observing doesn't necessarily have to come from seeing what you have to do with design, but it's also about what already exists. You can always question it. You can always ask um, more curious questions, which lead to your influencing your design later. So one of the biggest mistakes we make as young architects is that we believe that design begins with form. It doesn't. It begins with understanding. Whenever I start a project today, I try not to think of the building first. Who are the people that I'm meeting? When I'm sitting with the clients, I'm making notes. When I am going to the site, I'm photographing, and then I'm coming back, I'm telling my team, okay, this is what the site is. All this while I'm actually communicating, and mostly I'm either scribbling on my notebook or I have made some notes on my note app. And usually you don't realize, but subconsciously you write a lot more than you will realize as a designer, because every time you get your brief from your studio as well, the first thing you do is scribble out what ideas you have, the buzzwords, the keywords that you want to use in your design. So the kind of questions that you would ask sort of here is not is can be divided into different parts. So this is a project that we're doing in Odisha right now, which is a tropical farmhouse, and it is about understanding the people who live here, the culture here, the climate, and the rituals and customs that come with celebrating the rains or staying away in the afternoons and having an afternoon siesta. There's a culture around festivities, and there's a behavior that people will exhibit when they are in the building. So all of these questions sort of lead to design decisions, and every brick that is there does not become arbitrary. Even if your render looks beautiful and designed, it only comes after a lot of communication between the architect and the client who's communicating it to them. So this is one of the projects that I'm working on, and I will take you through it. So this is a courtyard study that we're doing, and the reason I say evidence beats assumption is it takes me back to my time working as a building performance consultant, because I did a lot of math, which I had not done when I was in India or doing practice, because sustainability, believe it or not, is a lot about crunching numbers at the end of the day. And I would have confidently said something like, this building feels hot when I'm sitting in a building. But that seems like a reasonable statement. But when you come to consultancy and building performance modeling, nobody would accept that while I was in the UK. So they would be like, where is it hot, and where exactly do you think it is hot for people? Because if you get into the technicalities of design, you would understand that younger people feel less or more hot compared to older people in certain situations. And at first, you might find that frustrating because the evidence is so different and you'll have to make so many more calculations. But I realized that it was very liberating because opinions can be endless, but evidence will give you clarity immediately. So when we are testing different design iterations for a building, which we were doing in this project, one of the versions will look very visually compact and elegant, and another one is more spread out. It has more deeper verandas, better orientation. And if we had only judged these buildings based on appearance, either of them could have been defended. But we ran simulations. That was sort of my job for 3 years. and we analyze things like daylight, solar gain, thermal comfort. And when we presented the ideas to our clients who were quite high profile at that point, they would understand it better because they're not from the design field. We'll have to understand that architects are not blessed that we are always designing for people who are very creative themselves. Whenever we speak to them, the question is always, okay, how do you know that this is going to work? So you will have to produce evidence. And to produce evidence, you'll have to convince your client as well. So that also is a part of writing, and writing well and writing briefly, because you cannot write a full essay or a dissertation to tell your client what your design idea actually is. So, what exactly is research? So, there are people who are doing PhDs, and usually people say, okay, there are designers architects who go on to actually pursue PhDs. And I used to think the same, that research is only for people who go into academics and become professors. But the longer that I've practiced, I've realized that we do spend a lot of time doing research every day. And we just don't call it research. When you visit a site, we call it sketching. That is actually research. When you're interviewing a client, you're researching. When you're comparing two construction systems and choosing between two materials, you're researching. When you're testing between researching. So research isn't really a documentation of something. Research is documentation of something. And I think architecture schools sometimes make research feel more complicated than it is. At its simplest, research is just a disciplined way of becoming less wrong. So every studio project you have done already in your time at the university already contains research, but um, because you've observed, you've measured, you've read a lot of previous projects, and you've reflected after your juries to understand what exactly went wrong or what went right. The only difference is that you probably didn't recognize those activities as research or write about them. So when you begin seeing your own work in hindsight, you will realize that you have stopped designing just for the sake of designing, and you have started designing because you read it somewhere, or you have researched it enough, or you have been influenced by something that you've seen in your vicinity in daily life. So writing as well is design. So the difference between both sides of this slide is that on one side I have all my graphs that I have presented to the client, and on the other side there's very succinct and very little bit of text, which is enough for the client to understand the gist of what's going on. So why a building looks a certain way, we understand diagrams all the time, and it's very easy for us to understand what the diagram is. If you do see it in detail, then you would probably understand. But then to send an email to a client or to put it into a competition entry, nobody is going to spend that much time looking at your diagrams or looking at your design. If you can find two sentences or three sentences that explain your idea very well, and that comes with practice. Obviously you won't do it in the first go. I never did. And I'm telling your team at the Open Collective before that I've been writing for the last 10 years, so that's why I write shorter sentences now. I write very less now. And I think that as in when you learn how to write, it doesn't really mean that you're going to write more. It sort of means that you'll probably end up writing much less and saying exactly what you want to say. This is what ArchDaily taught me. Now, a lot of interest was generated when this talking point had came about for the workshop about me working with ArchDaily. So I lead their India and Southwest Asia and Northern Africa region. And the way it probably changed me is more than any other experience that I've had, because every week I'm sort of exposed to hundreds of projects that come from all across the world. And after reading through all the submissions, some patterns are always seen about some words that are used in the submission or the way people talk about their project. How do I make it publishable? And how do I design that my project becomes publishable? I think the the layman answer is that it's beautiful photography or some very unusual form or a very famous architect. But I don't think those questions are enough in today's day and age because everyone can produce a very beautiful visual if they wanted to. I think the question editors like us continue to ask is what new understanding this project is bringing out. So think about that for a moment, not exactly why is it beautiful, is it expensive, is it trending, but mostly what does this project teach us? So that question changes everything because suddenly architecture doesn't become about appearance and it's not competing on who looks better sort of on the magazine. It's competing on ideas. And I've also noticed these recurring mistakes that I've put in. There are projects filled with buzzwords and there are sustainability claims that don't have any numbers to support them. They say that we remain cool in the summer, but there is no evidence that they do remain cool in the summer. So beautiful form without a clear argument is not going to come through to somebody like me for writing. So the strongest projects are often really quiet, they're clear, they're specific, they have one idea and they followed it through till the end. And as an editor, I don't think I will remember some of the loudest or fancy looking projects. I remember the ones that taught me something that I did not know before or a lesson that I've carried back into my own practice. And every project should leave the profession slightly wiser. And I think it's good that you students when you do graduate and start building on your own, you have that idea of not only making a project beautiful, but making it meaningful. So let's look at the anatomy of an argument. I want to leave you with a very practical framework. Whenever you're presenting a design, writing a dissertation, preparing your portfolio, or speaking in a jury, you can build your argument in these 5 steps. So you can start with a claim. For example, this is the testing that we've been doing for the project. So there's deep verandas improve thermal comfort in Odisha climate. Now that's a very interesting statement on its own, but it's not an opinion. It comes with evidence. So the evidence is on the left, where you talk about sun path studies, you talk about climate data, orientation, user behavior, and now you're supporting the claim. So that evidence then goes into the example. In one of our projects, like the shaded courtyards, not because they were traditional, they worked because they actually influenced solar gain. So it was very easy to convince our clients that this is how we want to go ahead with the design because we can show you evidence that it works. And that is where the insight comes in because when you start explaining that your ideas are not really just for pure aesthetic, a lot of clients will appreciate you much more or your university will appreciate you much more because students usually stop a little early. They just show the drawing, they show the analysis, but they never explain what that analysis meant and how that analysis influenced their design because the influence of that analysis should have led to your design, not the other way around. So, and eventually the conclusion becomes derived throughout the whole process. So, the framework will work. The framework has worked for me since university. So, I've done my studio juries, my client meetings, my competition, scholarship application. All of it I've done through sort of using these 5 methods because it gives you a clear, when you're writing as well, it will be very clear that in your paragraph or in your essays, you have a clear example of how this is going to flow, and that helps better understanding. So, this is a tool called Trello that I usually use on a daily basis, and I thought I'll give you an snapshot into some of the programming that we do for writing here at ArchDaily. It's easy for AI to actually, like I said earlier, um, do all of these things, generate, plan, summarize your work. But I don't think we should spend the next decade of design fearing AI because it's a very good tool. It helps organize, it helps brainstorm, and sometimes it could also challenge your own thinking. But it's just a tool. It's just like think about CAD. When CAD came, people were hand drawing, and hand drawings disappeared after. And when BIM systems came, people said architects would become obsolete. But when rendering software came and became very incredibly realistic, people said clients would not need architects anymore. But architect has survived. That is because it is not about what you're presenting to your clients or to your jury. It eventually is about judgment. So AI can generate the drawings, but it cannot decide whether those drawings are appropriate. So this is sort of a programming that I've done for my editorial. No AI tool can sort of decide that these are the articles that should be programmed based on my expertise or experience. But obviously, it can help me say summarize something or let me test if these claims made by someone is correct. But it cannot tell you which one is the most meaningful idea to move ahead with, or which is the one that is going to sustain. And architects who only thrive over the next generation, like the next decade or two, won't necessarily be those who know the best design prompts. They'll be the ones who ask the strongest questions, because we can always hire someone who's not an architect but can do prompt engineering. So are we making ourselves obsolete by not actually creating some original work of understanding context, of communicating clearly, and making decisions beyond just these tools that are available to us? We should ask ourselves that. So this bit is finding your own voice. I think I've been asked this at a lot of workshops that I've done. And by this point, it's just like, it's a question where everybody asks, how did you start and how did it become that you have this very unique voice that has led to the writing that you do today? But one thing I hope has become clear by now, that there is not one correct way to become an architect. Because if you look at my journey itself, it's been through many different paths and many different technical, non-technical work, from research to actually number crunching as a building performance consultant. So I think one mistake I thought I was making in my university was that I wanted to sound like an architect. There could be an article by someone like Rahul Mehrotra, and I'd be like, oh, he writes so well. But then I realized that people don't really remember architects because they imitate someone else's design. There is always a memory that is stored because you have developed your own voice. And that isn't just the way you write, it's also about how you approach problems, it's about your perspective on architecture. It's I have spent last half a decade working in sustainability, and somebody came to me and said that the earth is actually not melting and had some good arguments for it. I'd still listen to them because it will contribute to my curiosity, my knowledge. I'll just see what other perspective that they have. So that curiosity will push me to ask questions, and then it will sort of stop me from trying to impress the other person and start trying to understand the world, because people have come from very different backgrounds. And usually your work is more interesting when you start to take into consideration other perspectives, speak a lot to people, try to understand how they design or how they write. And don't worry about sounding intellectual, because nobody sounds intellectual all the time. Just worry about being genuinely curious, because in this world of AI flop and everybody sounding the same, if you have authenticity, I think it's going to sell and keep you relevant for a really long time. You don't have to copy anybody's path to becoming the architect that you want to become. Just try to do things that you enjoy, and one day you will have a journey which is as unique as yourself. This is a newsletter that got published in Denmark for the 3 days in Copenhagen Design Festival. And I got the opportunity to write a couple of articles in there. And I think I was looking back at this photograph and thinking about what habits I've inculcated over the last decade of writing while I was a student and while I was a professional, to now a director of my own firm. So um, it's never just one answer. I have done these in different capacities all throughout my life. I try to notice something new every day, and because architecture isn't really about the studios, when you're walking to class or waiting for a bus or visiting a cafe or traveling to another city, train yourself to notice things that everyone else ignores. Sort of like somebody sitting on a particular side of the bench, like I said in our Barcelona example, and you train yourself to understand why exactly is that spot comfortable for this person, and then that sort of ignites a curiosity in you. And some of the best ideas that come to me have come from outside architecture. I was an avid reader all my life. Architecture and writing generally came naturally to me because I read a lot from different fields like history, economics, and architecture influences everything. It might sound like a drab when your teachers tell you this, but it's actually true. You will not realize how connected architecture is while when you start designing, say, suddenly an institution and you've got to understand how classrooms work and how classes are taken by particular subjects and how a laboratory will work. So you end up learning about things that you did not think were relevant to your profession. And then the third is capture ideas before they disappear. I think we all have phones now, so I type a lot on my notes app. I will still sketch on my small notepad. I'll write down questions that occur to me during the day. If I've had an interesting conversation with someone and an idea or a debate was sparked, I'll make some notes of it. So the fourth part is a little bit interesting because when you question everyone that it's something that everyone else accepts. It is whenever you hear someone say, "Oh, we've done it this way. We've always done it this way. ये तो चलता ही है, ऐसे ही होता है." So you've got to ask the question, ऐसे क्यों होता है? Like you have to sort of think why these things or these systems have existed for this long. It could be at your practice, at your studio. If someone says that this is how things are, you should always ask the question and think through writing. So like when you are ideating on something, make ideas of what you will probably say in the jury to defend this idea. Seeking out to write one final proper paper on your design because that means nothing absolutely. Your process, which is so messy and it goes all over the place in different tangents, I think that is your voice and that you will realize when you are pairing it up at the end. um, Opportunities that writing has created, I think it creates a lot more opportunities than you realize. You don't necessarily have to leave architecture or become a non-architect to do this on the side. It's totally possible that somebody loves music and has pursued music while doing their university. So writing is sort of something similar. But one thing that happens is that you learn to communicate very well, and I think that leads to a lot more opportunities outside of work, like the kind that I'm speaking to you on a Saturday night. So it feels like it it leads to meeting more interesting people, being in rooms that you had not expected to be in. For myself, I went into University of Edinburgh on a scholarship. I ended up interviewing with my professor before I joined the university. And I think what stood out to him at that point, and I was told later at one of the alumni meets that the way I communicated stood out to him, and that was possible because I think I prepared myself really well in terms of um, how to say exactly what I want to say, and keeping that in mind, I think everybody should write, whether or not you publish, whether or not you get the opportunity to speak, or you are not probably a public speaker, you're probably shy. Except all of that, I think you should still keep a note, and there's always something beautiful that can come out of your writing. You never know where it'll take you. So if you have not started yet, there's no better time to start than now. So there is an exercise that I'll leave you with. You can do it later when you've got time. It's about choosing a building that you know. It could be your home as well. Or if you're given a studio project, don't open AutoCAD. Don't start sketching. Choose a building that you know well, and then just ask yourself 5 questions of this kind, or you can ask more. Why was it designed this way? Who benefits from it? What assumptions does it make when people are using it? And finally, would it still work if it was completely different somewhere else? Because context specific architecture is everything. And you will notice something at the end of this exercise, that none of these questions actually ask you to describe the building, because description isn't analysis. Critical thinking begins when we move beyond describing what we see, because everybody is seeing the same thing as we are seeing. So we need to ask why we are seeing this and why it exists in the first place. So if you build that habit with every studio project, you'll start getting more stronger, and your drawings obviously would be at a stage where they're improving, but your presentation would improve. You speak to people more clearly about your ideas. You'll be more confident to defend your ideas, and that will just improve the way you think, and that will make every other studio project much easier, because you know exactly the trick to thinking about the right things before you start designing. And then you'll not be standing defenseless at a jury, because I remember from my days half a decade ago, some juries were very taxing because you've not thought through that 12 a.m. decision that you've made. In closing, I would just like to say this, that throughout architecture school, we spend years trying to learn how to solve problems, and that's important. But somewhere along the way, we are sometimes taught to believe that good architects always have the answers. I don't think that's true at all. Most of the architects that I've worked with have, and I have admired throughout my career, have this thing in common. They're not the quickest to answer in the room. They're the most thoughtful before answering, and they ask questions that nobody else has thought to ask. And those questions lead to better buildings, better research, better conversations, and ultimately make you a better architect. So whether you become a practicing architect, a researcher, urban design, conservation architect, remember this, that your drawing will only show people what you have designed, but how you communicate your ideas will actually portray the kind of architect you will become. So I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you. Yes, touch me.
Good evening, ma'am.
Hi. Don't call me
Ma'am,
ma'am. Please call me Ananya.
sorry, Ananya. I just heard you say you attended the University of Edinburgh. I'm
Yeah.
so sorry if this moves a little off topic, but I was really intrigued by it. Could you walk us through your experience of applying to the university and through your what basically what strengths of yours helped reach you to the scholarship,
Yeah.
and what was your experience there? What was your portfolio like?
Yeah.
Something about it, please.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a very good question. And I think a lot of students have always sort of been intrigued when I say University of Edinburgh, because for design usually people choose very off-beaten paths. The reason I chose, so I had a very extensive process of choosing my master's, because I did not want to go to the UK and do architecture, because I think some of you might know that REBA has a whole different system for becoming a licensed architect, and 5 years of education in India already makes you a licensed architect here. So I had no interest of staying in a dying economy in the UK for all my life and working there. So my plan was always to try something different. And sustainability is one of my passions, actually. I really enjoy talking a lot about what climate change has done to our comfort levels as human beings. So this course, the MSc Advanced Sustainable Design, is a very small course. Like it has only 15 people that they take every year, and it is only one of its kind, because you get to you get to stay at the University of Edinburgh and do the course, but you can choose your project sort of anywhere in any context. So that is what intrigued me the most, because, like I said, I always wanted to come back to India. So my plan was to go there, learn their system, but still work on studio projects that were Indian. So that is to answer the first half of your question, that University of Edinburgh and why. Then again, Edinburgh is a very, very beautiful place. It's got architecture that ranges back to really old times. It's got Georgian influences. It's got English influences. It's also got a much more and safer lifestyle than the rest of the UK has in the south. So Scotland was a good choice for me to live as well as a woman staying there. So that is how Edinburgh happened. Now, my process for applying and getting the scholarship was that I ended up writing to, so they have different scholarship programs. They have something called the Dean Scholarship, which is basically the School of Architecture awards it to 5 or 6 students across different courses. So for that, you will have to make a separate application other than your application for the main course. So once I was through to my main course, I had spoken to my professor, like the professor who was going to run the entire course for the year. I was in contact with him 1 year before I actually started applying. So I told him that I was interested in the course and this was my background, and I was always asking him questions like how is the course going in the year previous to me, and I was always very open to the fact that I would have delayed responses because I'm not a student yet. Why would they respond to me? But for a year, I spent time just following my professor, John Brennan. And then he told me that there was a scholarship opportunity which I would be perfectly placed for because I had some experience in the field and I did writing on the side. So I pitched myself as both a writer in the field of sustainability and someone who has done some sort of practice here in India, which sort of is not relevant in the UK, if I'm being honest, but still for a student that worked. And then when I was in university, I started working on software for building simulation. And that's sort of why I ended up getting a job in the UK economy because you might have heard from your seniors, it is quite difficult nowadays to get a job abroad. But I consider myself lucky. And also, obviously, I think the multifaceted portfolio that I had, my portfolio not only had my design project, it also had my writing work. It also had a couple of interviews that I'd given. Um, so I think holistically, I prepared my portfolio to not just be about design. It was about me as a person in the field for 6 years by then. So that helps. Always make your portfolio as unique as you want. Don't just put in design project because they say put in design project. They're not going to stop you if you put in your extracurricular work. I mean, there are people who do a lot of podcasting, they do music, and that sort of plays into their architecture education. So maybe they put that into their portfolio. I don't know, but there is always an option that you can make your portfolio unique to yourself and then get a scholarship call. I hope that answered your question, Dashni.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please feel free to ask any question or any feedback or any comment if you have.
You guys can always reach out to me on my LinkedIn. I was telling Harsh this. I don't use Instagram, but I'm sure he can pass you on my LinkedIn. I'm happy to answer any questions later if you guys find that comfortable as well. But yeah, if you guys want to stay in touch, I think LinkedIn's a good place.
I had a question about what is your writing process like? Like, how does
Hmm.
it start, and how do you you said na ki how do you decide if a
Yeah.
piece is ready or not? But how does it start?
Right. So
Yeah,
I
sorry.
think, yeah, Harsh, go
Uh,
ahead.
I just I had also a similar question. I just add to the question.
Yeah,
So
yeah, go ahead.
basically, yeah, I just read the article of the water and the water is a source of transport that decides and that drives the architecture differently from the roads in
Yeah.
current times. And we talk about the example of Bangkok uh, and you also quoted some research and some person's name. So I was very curious about how when you get an article, so how is your workflow like? How many? How was your research? And then what's your initial text or initial writings, and how did you arrive at the final edited, more clean text
Yeah.
and the pictures also? I'm very curious. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the question, because I'm an editor myself, I don't actually get assigned a topic. What usually happens is I can pick my own topic. I always look for, there is sort of a certain theme that we follow every month, and that theme comes because we are based across the world. So we have editors all across the world, and we have meetings, and then we decide on a particular theme for the month. But in that theme, we are sort of free to do anything that we like. Um, so, say I have to, if I look at a theme first, I start looking at it from the Indian perspective. Obviously, a lot of my work is from the India and SWANA region. So I am a big, um, I don't know, advocate for Indian technology, low tech, sustainable solutions, and ideas that are not being discussed in architectural discourse everywhere else. So the process starts by me sort of reading a lot. Like I said, I read a lot throughout my days. So I already sort of have an idea when I look at a topic about how to approach it from an Indian lens. And also, I like to take topics which have not been discussed before, like the one that you mentioned about water being water transport ways or rivers being different than roadways. That is because I have traveled quite a lot and have understood that um, roads influence urban design in a certain way. So why not take a different take at it? So I think it comes with a little bit of experience of choosing articles. I mean, choosing topics. But to answer Varanya's question about how what the process is like, once I've chosen the topic, what I do is I try to have major themes already in place. So I know that I'm going to make 2 or 3 claims, suppose, in that project, in that article. So I know that I'm going to claim that the roadways and rivers differences, and then I'm going to talk about how the river has, because of the river's nature of swelling and shrinking, why is there a difference in the way the colonies behave around it. So I make the article down into 4 or 5 major claims. Then I try to find evidence, like I was saying, about that claim through research or through reading. And once I've got sort of the messy bit sorted, like I have organized the article without writing. So this does not involve me writing any big paragraphs or sentences or anything. It's mostly bullet points. It's very rough ideas. The grammar is not correct half the time. So I just put that together. And then after, once I have sort of the outline ready, is when I get into the writing. And I take a little bit of liberty in terms of how I write and choose my images, because I have spoken to my other editors about it. India has an issue of finding good images. Like we have photographers. I do have friends who went on to do photography later on, but sometimes the images have to be from open source Wikimedia Commons or from other publications. So the image sourcing bit comes completely at the end when we decide how the article is going to look. But mostly the time goes in putting together the outline, because once the outline is ready, I know what I want to say about the different bullet points that I have, and it makes writing much easier. एक bullet point के बारे में एक पूरा paragraph लिखना is easier than trying to start with the paragraph on its own. So I make a lot of notes and have like very segmented sections. And then I try to bring all those sections together by just adding, say, a couple of lines at the end of each section leading on to the next section. So that's how I write. So my process mostly, my time mostly goes into putting together that list of bullet points about what the article should be about. And then I start writing.
Yeah, thanks.
Do you guys have writing workshops in Jamia otherwise? Like, do you guys have an elective that is about journalism or writing?
Uh, we don't have right now, I think. Maybe in coming times we should have.
Mm. Do you guys like have a
And
publication that your college made?
uh, yeah, we did have a publication by college, by students led, but I think right now it's not working. Uh,
Mm. Right,
And I think they are students from different colleges also in the board. So
right,
they could
right.
have a elective on writing maybe.
Mm. Yeah,
I think I'm also very curious to know about you talk about the architects you admire.
yeah.
And yeah, so I just want to know about the architects from India and abroad. So yeah,
Yeah, so I think architects from India that I really like is there's I mean I like firms more than architects. Let me
yeah.
clarify why.
That's good.
Because because eventually what has happened, the concept of star architect is going away in our generation, and I really like that because I have also set up my company as a private limited, so it's not going to be known by my name. I want other designers to come and work, and then the company goes forward. So I'm a big fan of firms that do well in the south because I spent a lot of time uh, working, like talking to people in the south as well, and now I also cover their work. So in the south, there's Tapati Architects who do great work around Bangalore, and they also work in Kerala. And in India, I like Arcom a lot in Delhi. I think their director is really a nice guy, and I think that company also works in a very collaborative process. So they are really good as well. Um, Abroad, I think abroad there's many, not the big names like Norman Foster and all, but there's smaller people in there's Leviton Bernstein in the UK, which is a very small firm. There's like 5 or 6 people, but they're doing very good work. In Sri Lanka, there's Geoffrey Bava. This is like an architect who's already passed, but there was Minyat de Silva also in Sri Lanka. I'm a big fan of tropical architecture that way. So I think I like places when they are not very commercial and that kind of architecture. So yeah, I think Geoffrey Brava was one of my favorite architects when I was in college for a really long time. Now
Yeah,
it's evolving to others, but yeah,
yeah. The drawings of Baba's garden and all, the way they
yeah,
make the north and it's amazing. And even
yeah,
the Parinda's work in Sri Lanka is nice. Uh,
yeah.
and another that Angel and the Studios work is also.
Yes, yes, yes. So if there's not any more questions, should we head into closing? I want to do that.
Yeah,
Late.
yeah. I think that's the last call. If someone just want to ask, they can.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
guys
I
should
think we
but
just
definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to like hear about your master applications and like what you guys want to do later. I love talking to young people. It keeps me young. I am young, but I want to talk to everyone who's younger than me so I understand what's going on in the field. So please link up to me on LinkedIn and
yeah,
then we can take the conversation from there.
yeah. And then just last summed up question, I think, about the critical thinking.
Yeah.
So I think you should give some bullets point for develop the critical thinking in the design studio exercises as a framework for the students, or could be the framework for the architects also. Yeah,
Right. Right. So the reason I structured my presentation this way is that I think critical thinking usually um, seems like a very big idea. It is not that big of an idea. The idea is just to have some structure to the way you ask questions, like I was saying, for each project, the way you approach the design before putting pen to paper to sketch something. I think critical thinking comes from that sort of a framework. So the idea should always be that you look at um, like you question the behaviors, you question the understand the culture, understand the context, all of this, and then slowly it ends up into your final design project. Because I feel like people have romanticized the idea of critical design a lot and made it seem like it's something bigger than it is. It is just about your unique process of thinking, and I think everybody can develop their own process for it. It doesn't necessarily have to match um, a given framework or something that everybody else is doing. So if you have a process that you find works for you, if you start by just giving a character to your client and then start talking to that client and finding out exactly, hypothetically talking to the client and finding out what he would need, then your studio project sort of ends up being more informed because now your client has a personality and they require something. So I feel like that can be a process in itself. Then the other process that I follow, like I said, is start by questioning and observing things that people have not observed before. So I like taking an image, blacking it out, in dividing it into say positives and negatives, looking at the blank spaces, but for each one, the process can be different. In professional practice, there's no process. You listen to your you listen to your client first, and then you push for your idea as much as you can. But it helps that you have the evidence of testing or the evidence of doing simulations, that your clients do get convinced that what you're saying, you know what you're saying. Because starting a practice as a young person is always hard, but I think with the right clients, it's just easier to explain to them what you want to say. And critical thinking is not as blown up as you would think it is.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think over to Ananya to use for the note, I think.
Yeah.
Is Varanya here?
Yeah, yeah. Hi. Sorry, I was having some networking issues. Thank you so much, Ananya. We loved having you, and honestly, it was a great time. Like learning about all of the things and the whole process of going to masters, and like it actually was very on ground help that will help us in real time right now. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Anya, and thank you guys for spending your evening with me and inviting me. And I hope we can keep in touch and I get to see you guys in person someday in Delhi, maybe.
Thank you. Thank
All the
you
best
all.
for your work. Bye.